Well, good afternoon, everyone. It is 3:02. I know some people were still popping into the room, but we're going to go ahead and get started because Dr. Christopher Thornton is here with us this afternoon, and he has a lot to tell us, and I'm looking forward to hearing from him. Dr. Thornton is the Senior Director of U.S. and International Programs at the American Council of Learned Societies. And he spent 7 years as the director of the Division of Research Program at the National Endowment for the Humanities. He oversaw grants, fellowships, all of which supported academic and public scholarship. Dr. Thornton holds a PhD in anthropology from the University of Pennsylvania and a master's in, what is that, philosophy, Chris? In archaeology from the University of Cambridge.
An MPhil, yeah.
Yeah, wow. All right. And an AB in archaeology and archaeometry. I'll have to Google that, from Harvard University. So this is impressive. He's a nice guy, from what I can tell in our interactions. And I know that he has a lot of information that he's going to share with us today. And so I'm just going to turn it over to you. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Dave. Thanks for organizing this. Thanks to Russ and to Sandy for inviting me. Hi, everyone. It's Friday afternoon. I'm told this is a 2-hour meeting, so I'll read from the phone book for the next 2 hours and just keep you all here. But Russ asked if I'd come in and talk to you a little bit about my experience in grant making, and I've been a grant maker now for about 15 years, maybe a bit more, both in nonprofit and in federal government. I started my grant-making career at the National Geographic Society, overseeing science and social science grants and conservation and education and storytelling and all sorts of grants eventually. But really, I started in science and social science. And then I moved over to the NEH, and suddenly I was a humanist, and I was doing lots of humanities grant-making. As Dave said, my undergrad was in something called archaeometry, which is better known as archaeological science or lab-based archaeology. So I started more in the geosciences, material sciences, that kind of thing. And I gradually shifted to my PhD over to anthropology and got really interested in sort of what we in anthropology would call maybe social theory, which is often called humanistic social science or interpretive social science. So the more theoretical, looking at questions of power, society, gender, race, sexuality, all of those things. So I did a full spectrum in my academic career, and then that's translated a bit into my grant making. So I'm happy, if there are questions at the end, I'm happy to talk about some of the differences in the way that I've seen science grant making, social science grant making, and humanities grant making, and at both application writing and from the grantor side. But I did go to the NEH for, 7 years. I ran the research division. Russ was, of course, my deputy originally, and then he became the director of outreach for the NEH as a whole. So you have somebody working with you on campus. So I probably don't need to answer too many questions about the NEH, but I'm happy to do that. Nowadays, so as Dave said, I work for the American Council of Learned Societies, or the ACLS. Many of you probably have heard of us. Usually only academics have ever heard of us. So we've been around about 110 years. We were founded by the learned societies, by the scholarly societies back in 1919. So, the American Historical Association and the American Institute of Archaeology and all of that. They founded us because they needed a sort of central nonprofit who could represent them to Congress, who could represent them internationally. So it wasn't a constant squabble between the historians and the literature language people about who should take the lead, right? It was a centralized nonprofit that essentially worked for all of the learned societies, sort of holistically. And within a few years, the ACLS founded grant programs. And again, the point of that was, instead of the American Historical Association or, giving grants to historians, which they also do, the idea was to have a central grant-making, organization that funded just the best scholarship in the humanities and interpretive social sciences. With the intention being kind of cross-disciplinary or interdisciplinary long before that was even an idea, right? So if the historian, the archaeologist, the philosopher, and the Victorian literature expert can all agree that this is the best project, that would be funded through the ACLS. And that was kind of how we started. So we continue to this day. We convene the learned societies around various issues. We work to connect them with each other when necessary. So as you can imagine, since last year, well, past few years, but last year especially, there's been a lot of discussion about, what is the future of the humanities? How do we help higher ed in general? The lack of public trust, attacks from the federal government, from state level governments, etc. What can we do to protect academic freedom? So we are deeply enmeshed. We're a small organization. I should say we're based in New York, but we have staff kind of all over the place. I'm still based in DC. We're about 40 people total, and that includes Servio, who sits at the front desk, right? So we're a pretty small organization, and we're run by Joy Connolly, who's a classicist by training and had an illustrious career as an academic administrator before coming to ACLS as our president about 5 years ago. And we're sort of tied in with various networks. So obviously we have the learned societies. There's now 86 learned societies, part of our group, and we work with the executive directors, but also with the academic representatives, whether they're delegates or presidents elected in, etc. On various issues. Right now we work with them on trying to understand what could be the future of doctoral education in the current climate, and with shrinking funds, like what should a PhD in the humanities look like? And we also have a network of the sort of big R1 schools, so the big research schools, essentially the AAU schools. We work with them specifically in the humanities. So we gather the deans of humanities every year in the fall to talk about issues specific to the humanities, right? We are obviously working closely with the AAC&U, the AU, the AUP, all the big organizations that deal with higher ed. And we have a larger network of associate members, which could be universities, small colleges, minority serving institutions, but also some of the research institutes, like the Newberry Library, the Huntington, et cetera, some of the various consortia, et cetera. So we're known as a grant maker. Obviously our fellowship is our flagship program. It is sadly the last open call fellowship for the humanities and interpretive social sciences. The NEH, as you know, has shrunk its purview to be just American studies and a very sort of traditional form of American studies. So we're the last open call, basically. And what we're seeing, as you can imagine, is huge need out there for funding. We do have other programs, some of which you'll know, some would surprise you probably, for programs that are US based. We have a dissertation fellowship program for really innovative, cutting edge, innovative research in dissertation. So about year 3 or 4 of a grad student. We have a program for HBCUs. We've got, gosh, what else do we have? A program for American art. We've got sort of random. I should say that we are not one of the large endowments, right? We're not Ford, we're not Mellon, we're not Carnegie. We have a very modest endowment, about 200 million, which keeps the lights on and keeps most of our staff employed. But our grant programs, most of them run on soft money. So we get money from the large endowments, and we do sort of large scale grant making, usually fellowships. We have great relationship with many of the big endowments who don't want to run fellowship programs with thousands of applications, so they give us the money to do it. And that's become, in the past few decades, kind of our forte or our specialty is helping the large endowments to run small grant programs. We also have international programs. China studies, Buddhist studies are the big 2 right now. We also have a program in Bulgaria, if you are interested in Eastern Europe or if you work in Eastern Europe. We have a summer seminar program there. The China studies and Buddhist studies, again, they're externally funded. They're mostly fellowships for grad students, early career, generally speaking. Buddhist studies is a bit wider. It has a public scholars program. These are what I call vocational fellowships. So they're meant to place either grad students or recent PhDs in non-academic positions, often academic adjacent positions like a museum, to give them real life skills outside of the academy while also using their academic background in, sort of in a non-academic job. So we place recent PhDs and grad students in community nonprofits. We place them in museums. We place them in nonprofit journals, so usually online journals, so media and communication, essentially. And so we have a variety of these programs that are called vocational fellowships, including the Buddhist Public Scholars, the Leading Edge Fellowship, that's for recent PhDs in the United States, and a new program which is for current PhD students in religious studies, which is GISI. I'm not going to tell you what it means because it's got a silly title, but if you have any grad students in religious studies, you can look up GISI, or GISI, as we call it. We have lots of dumb acronyms. Anyway, so that's ACLS. That's sort of what we do, broadly speaking. Lots of different programs. I'm happy to talk about any of those programs. If people have questions, you can put them in the chat or raise your hand, and I'll talk about them a little bit or answer your questions. I can tell you that, our success rates right now are pretty dismal, which is true of most grantors across the board in the humanities and social sciences. The need is so great. There's not a lot of money in university levels. Thanks, Dave. There's not a lot of university level funding for even basic research now. Even going to conferences is really hard to get funding. I'm sure you all know that. And that makes the need great. So we, for example, in our flagship ACLS fellowship program, we get about 2,500 applications a year just in that one program. And we have enough money to give 60 awards. That makes us technically more competitive than a Guggenheim. So that just shows you that as the last open call for basic research in the old method, Mellon has stopped doing that kind of funding. Ford has stopped doing that kind of funding. The NEH obviously has shrunk in what it will focus on or fund. That leaves us the last program standing. That does create some problems. For our dissertation fellowship program, we get over 1,000 applications a year because there's very little funding for grad students now in the humanities. So we're seeing, I wouldn't say huge spikes because those spikes actually started before last year. They started in COVID when, finances at universities and colleges got really dire, and so people started needing more money quickly. So that's all to say, our programs are incredibly competitive right now. You've heard, I'm sure, before, tips on what you should do. The best advice I usually give, which I know Russ Weiland also gives, is the advice that you should always have like a 2 or 3 year plan, right? So if you have a sabbatical coming up in 2028, you should be applying this year. And the reason for that is if you do get the award, which would be wonderful, you can always delay it, right? And you can delay it until 2028 when your sabbatical would start. You can also, if you get a prestigious award, like an ACLS fellowship, usually your university administration will allow you to take sabbatical early to fit the fellowship, which is also great. More likely, however, statistically, is you'll be rejected. And when that happens, the best thing you can do is, of course, ask for your reviews and get comments back. Make your revisions, talk to, get answers if you're confused about what went wrong or whatever, and then you reapply. So you have to plan to reapply plan to apply twice at least. Best case scenario is to apply 3 times in a row. And then, getting better every time is the hope. I know in the past, ACLS has struggled to get comments out. When our numbers exploded, it became very difficult to get 2,500 application reviews out the door, because imagine each application gets at least 2 or 3 reviews to start, and then we triage. So from that first batch of reviews, we narrow down to just about 10% of them go forward to seated panels. So, 250 to 300 of the 2,500 go to a seated panel, and then they get additional review. So another, let's say 3 or 4 reviewers. So you can take 2,500 and times it by, 3 to 4, and you can see that's just in one program. So it's been very difficult to get comments out. I'm very pleased to say, though, maybe I'm announcing it formally, we had our tech team use AI for a good purpose. They had AI code for us a really useful user interface that we can quickly look over reviewer comments, make sure there's nothing that we have to redact or anything problematic, and then easily get them out to applicants who are rejected or awarded, who ask for their reviews. So this year, for the first time ever, we'll be able to provide comments to everyone who asks for them, which is really exciting. We used to do that with the NEH. Obviously, it was publicly funded, so there was a feeling that taxpayers deserved to get their comments at the very least. And I'm a believer that with very difficult competitions, when success rates are so low, the only value in applying is potentially getting your reviews back, getting peer review and getting feedback on your project, but also on your application writing, with the hopes that you can then take those comments and improve both the project and your application. So I'm very pleased that we're going to be able to do that this year. We've already started. To give you an idea, with the 10,000 reviews that we had just for the ACLS fellowship program, we've already got all of those completed internally, and we're beginning to send them out as people request them. So that's really exciting, and it means that people will have their comments back, will reapply, and hopefully have a better chance because they'll have some feedback already. So that's what I was just my little intro on ACLS. I did send Dave a PowerPoint that I use when I go to universities. It's generic. It's basically what's on our website, but our website can be hard to navigate. So the idea of that PowerPoint, which Dave will share with everyone, I think through Canvas, is the first part of it just talks about who is ACLS, like who are we, what do we do, and it gives you some sort of examples of the different networks I mentioned. And then it just goes program by program by program by program. So it's just very dry. It's just bullet points. It's trying to boil down the sort of essentials that you need to know about each program, but hopefully it will help you if you're trying to decide where to apply or just to see what kind of programs exist. It's maybe a quicker way to quickly see what we have available and whether you're eligible and whether it would be the right place for you to apply. So that is available. And at the bottom are some tips for application writing, many of which were lovingly stolen from our old NEH slide decks that Russ helped to develop. So if you've ever dealt with Russell Island and you get his tips, you'll notice these are very similar. So, but they're there anyway. And if you ever have questions, you can always feel free to reach out either to me or to Russ to help you in what we're trying to say in those tips. But again, it's things like, don't just apply once and then expect to get funded. And then if you don't get funded, you say, oh, well, that's it then. Have a 2 or a 3 year plan to apply and plan to be rejected. This is a tip I give to people all the time. If you plan to be rejected, it's like when you send a draft to a friend and you say, hey, get out your red pen and beat the crap out of this and then send it back, please. When it sends back and it's full of red ink, you're not generally like, oh no, it's struck to my core, because you asked them to do that, right? So if you kind of can get your head in the same space there where you're like, I'm sending this to peer reviewers through ACLS and they're going to beat the crap out of it and then send it back to me. And that's what I need, because I need that feedback. That mentality will help you a lot when you likely get rejected. I mean, again, our success rate now is like 2.7%. So let's just say, statistically speaking, you will be rejected. So when you are then rejected, it doesn't sting so much. And you're like, great, that was constructive. Thanks so much. I've got my feedback now, and I'm going to work on it and then maybe reapply. I will say, a lot of studies have shown, believe it or not, grantors do studies. Studies have shown that women, people of color, first-generation students are much less likely, or faculty are much less likely to reapply when they're rejected. They take rejection really hard. They also have they tend to have a lot more administrative things on their plate. So they apply once, they don't get it, and they quit. And this has been shown, a number of studies that have questioned, why is it that generally men, and white men in particular, those who look like me, are more likely to be funded by some of the big funders? And it doesn't come down to bias on the peer reviewers. And it doesn't even necessarily come down to more men than women apply, although sometimes that is true. It's often that women and people of color don't reapply when they're rejected, whereas people who look like me are much more likely to just be like, oh, I got rejected. Okay, well, let me take the comments and I'll reapply. So I like to point that out, that there are some studies that suggest that this is a real thing, and we want to obviously push against that, right? So if you fit into one of those categories that's likely to take rejection maybe harder or less likely to reapply, again, go in with the mindset of, I will be rejected, and that's great. And I'll get that feedback, as long as you can get feedback, right? And now again, ACLS is going to be providing feedback. Not all funders are able to do that. And that's something that in this time when things are really difficult and there's a lot of need. So you're probably looking widely for funding across many different sources. You need to prioritize your time. And the things you should be looking at are success rates. How likely are you to get funding? And then after success rates, how likely are you to get comments back? And if they don't explicitly say that in the program, you can always reach out and ask, if I apply and I'm rejected, would I be able to get comments back? And if they say no, then you need to take that into consideration in deciding where should I apply, right? Because with low success rates and no comments back, you will spend a lot of time, a lot of money, right? A lot of your time, a lot of other people's time getting that application in, and you are unlikely to get anything in return, right? It's kind of like playing the lottery. Whereas at least if you get comments back, you're getting something substantive, something that can really help, even if the success rates are very low. Okay. I had a few other things I want to go over in case they're helpful. Right now, people ask me, wow, with these low success rates, should I even bother applying? Like what would be the point? Again, comments is one reason to apply if you can get it. I would say that success rates across the board, at least in the humanities and social sciences right now, are pretty tough, mostly because the NEH and the NSF have become what they are, and make it very difficult to apply. So what I've been telling people is if you look at some of the small residential centers, so if you want to do research in the humanities and interpretive social sciences or the social sciences, the small residential centers around the country, like the independent research centers, but also those that are based on university campuses. So again, I mentioned Newberry Library, Huntington, those are the big ones, the National Humanities Center in North Carolina, AAS in Boston, there's a bunch in Philadelphia, a bunch in New York, etc. But even the ones that are, a humanities center at UIUC, in Illinois, many of them have fellowship programs for residential fellowships, right? And they tend to be short, maybe a semester, sometimes two if you're lucky. They're usually pretty short, 4 to 5 months is typical. Some of them are even shorter than that. Their success rates are much lower than the national competitions. So you have a much better chance if you need to get some research leave and you need funding to do that. Getting one of those residential fellowships is a great way to do it. I also tend to note, and I'm sure Russ Weiland, for those who have spoken with him know this, for the big national competitions in the humanities and social science research, the sweet spot tends to be when you're in the middle of the project. That is, you've already done a bunch of the research, like the archival research, field research, whatever it is, and you've started writing. That's the sweet spot for applying for the big national fellowships or grant programs. The reasons for that are very simple. With so much competition, peer reviewers are looking for a sure bet, right? They're looking for someone who really knows what they're doing, who's well on track, and is likely to finish, right? And that is the sweet spot, that middle of the road, right? Or middle of the journey, right? Is a better way to say it. You've done the initial research, you're well into starting writing. So you have a clear chapter outline for what you're planning to write, if it's a book, or you have a clear outline for the article that you're planning to write. And you already have most of the data. You can then apply for these fellowships, these big national things, to go complete your archival work and write 2 chapters or whatever. Not a good time to apply to those national fellowships is right in the beginning of a project. Again, unless you're planning to get rejected, to get feedback, and then you reapply next year when you're a bit further along. But you're unlikely to get these big national fellowships at the beginning of your project, when you have a cool idea and there's a cool archive to get to or cool sources to work with, but you haven't started yet. So you're high risk in that sense to a peer reviewer. The other side of it, when you're almost done, is also not a good time to apply for these big competitive fellowships. Because again, peer reviewers look at there like, she's already done. She doesn't need really this because she'll finish it anyway. It's a snowball effect. She's almost done, right? They have this mentality, even if it's not true. So the sweet spot is that middle of the road, middle of the journey. That is not necessarily true at the residential fellowships, right? So I often tell people the residential programs, because they're very cohort centered, they look to build cohorts, they look to build connections between different scholars. Sometimes they want a senior scholar to be resident because they have a lot of grad students or undergrads, and they want somebody there who's also going to do some mentoring, teaching, that kind of stuff. Not when I say teaching, I don't mean like a whole course, but like giving a lecture or whatever. Those residential fellowships often prefer early stage or late stage. I mean, middle of the road is always good, but like those early and late stage projects tend to do better at residential fellowships. So that's something to keep in mind, depending on where you are in your project. And I should say the fellowship directors across the country, we talk to each other quite frequently. So we try to make things easy for people, but we also, we will check with each other sometimes, like, oh, okay, we're planning to award this fellowship to this person. They said they also applied to this place. We check in with that fellowship director or program officer to say, hey, were you planning to award them? And we generally just try to make sure that we're not allowing someone to double dip because there's a lot of need out there, or that we try to make sure there's no overlap if we are going to allow them to take both, like they're complementary fellowships. But just so you know, so there's a lot of conversation among the fellowship directors for the humanities, at least, which is good. We actually met just yesterday to talk about the reinstatement of NEH grants and what that means for all of us. So if you have questions about that, happy to answer that. Okay. Any questions about anything so far? Because I promised Russ I could also, if people were interested, just give a sort of 10,000-foot view about what I'm seeing in research funding, generally speaking. But I want to check in because I know I've been blabbing. Any questions about ACLS? Any questions about NEH? Any questions about research fellowships? Again, you can feel free to put them in the chat if that's easier.
I don't have anything in the chat for you, Chris. A lot of times people do type them in the chat simply because, I don't know, they feel maybe a little reticent, a little uncomfortable speaking.
That's fair.
I don't seem to have that issue most of the time, which is a blessing or a curse. You decide.
Okay. Well, I can keep going on. So the other thing I promised to talk about was just give a kind of 10,000-foot view of what I'm seeing, right? And it's hard right now. We're in a really difficult period of transition, right? And change. We often talk about decline. We talk about crisis, particularly in the humanities. It's become a kind of mantra. But for those who have sort of looked into it, the historiography of this is we've been talking about a crisis in the humanities since people stopped learning Greek and Latin back in the 19th century, right? This is it's part of our culture. It's a little bit defeatist. It's a little bit catastrophizing. But it feels real at the time. Like, I'm not denying that it feels to me right now like we're in a catastrophic time of pulling away from the humanities and social sciences. I definitely also feel that we're in a period, obviously, public trust in higher ed is dismal right now, and there's, a zillion reasons for that, but it's very unfortunate for all of us who care about higher ed, and care, and believe that higher ed is serving a critical purpose in the United States. It's a difficult time to know that the public has kind of turned against us. They feel that we aren't serving their needs, that we aren't providing whatever it is they think they want, or that we're not a public good or a public benefit. And that's really hard. I would say, though, that, when you look, at recent history of higher ed, you look at history of humanities and social sciences, let's say the past 100 years, this is not the first time. It's not the first time the public has turned against us. It's not the first time that administrations have attacked humanities in particular. Arts and humanities tend to be the canaries in the coal mine, right? Because we, on the one hand, we're not important, as they like to tell us, or that we're somehow frivolous or secondary, and then we're the first to get attacked because obviously we are the hearts and minds, right? That's from a political angle, we're the most dangerous because we're most likely to convince people otherwise or ask people to think critically or think differently about what the political mantra of the day is. So, we tend to feel this constant pressure from political forces in particular, but now cultural and social forces as well. And it does make it really hard. But I'm a firm believer in what punctuated equilibrium, for those of you who are biologists out there. The Stephen Jay Gould version of evolution, which says that things evolve. They don't evolve linearly. It's not just like a constant line of progress in some Marxian way. It's punctuated by these periods of rapid change and then relative stasis, right? Rapid change and relative stasis. And as an archaeologist, I believe that. I see that in the archaeological record all the time. right? Where a civilization seems to be fairly consistent. And then there's this massive period of disruption, which in the archaeological record could be like 200 years, but it looks like a blip in archaeology, right? It's like a single layer. But there's this period of disruption, and then what comes after is very different, right? And we used to talk about it in terms of civilization and collapse. So again, this concept of crisis or decline or whatever. And we now, in a sort of post-colonial mindset, don't think about it in terms of collapse. We think about it as transition, right? Where, for example, in the Middle East, where I work, there's a constant ebb and flow of urban civilizations with irrigation and farming, whatever, and then periods where they move back into a kind of more nomadic or transhuman lifeways, right? That they become more nomadic in the landscape, less farming, less cities, less whatever. That doesn't mean the farmers totally go away, and it doesn't even necessarily mean the cities collapse. It's just the population shift to adapt to the needs of the time, whether those are environmental pressures, social pressures, political pressures, etc. And we see that archaeologically, and I see it now today, right? I feel that we are in a period of rapid transition. It is caused by a number of forces. Obviously, there's environmental pressures, there's technological pressures, which we have put on ourselves, like AI and social media, cultural, social pressures. There are all these pressures, and it's causing a period of rapid change. And we're in the change right now. This is my perspective. We're in the change right now, and that makes it incredibly hard to see what the future holds, right? Some would argue it's impossible to see the future. That sounds dumb. Of course, it's impossible. Many people would argue you can't even guess what the future will hold, so you shouldn't even try. I don't agree with that, but it's a very difficult period right now, and we saw it last year. The attacks on the NEH, the NIH, the NSF was unthinkable to most of us, I would say. And yet it happened, and here we are. And that has really shaken the core of the sort of higher ed scholarly research landscape, right? And nobody knows what it means. I mean, is the NSF going to go back to the way it was? Is the NIH ever going to go back to the way it was? We like to think, oh, this is just an anomaly, and a new regime will come in and they'll fix this because this is crazy. And why would we blow up our scientific engine? And why would we blow up the humanities? Whatever. The reality is we don't know. And it is possible that the system that worked in this country since World War II, this relationship between the federal government and institutions of higher education, which was seen as mutually beneficial, it's no longer seen that way, and or it's been broken. So we don't really know what's coming, right? So this is my, again, 10,000 foot view from where I sit, looking at various institutions and also having come from the government. I don't think anybody knows what comes next. And that includes the more conservative think tanks that sort of came up with this plan in the first place. They have a vision that if we blow it all up, we can finally get it back to where it should be. And they're trying really hard to do that. But as anyone in this call probably knows, you can't go backwards. You can create a sort of, fake version of what the past was, but you'll never recreate the past. So we're in this awkward phase of forces trying to move us backwards, yet we are constantly moving forwards, right? And so it creates this push and pull dynamic. That's very high level. None of that is probably a surprise to any of you, but I tend to start there to sort of, in my mind, it helps me relax about it because we're in this period of rapid transition and we can't possibly push, as individuals or even as a group, we will not change those rapid, incredible pressures on the system. We kind of have to ride that wave and see where it ends up. Now, we can do things to steer it in the right directions. And I'm not going to talk about what we can do as citizens of the United States. That's not my forte, but you can imagine there are things that we in our home life as citizens, residents, etc., can be doing to kind of push back against the forces that would undermine us, right? As academics, as scholars, as administrators, as people who care about higher ed, what can we be doing right now? Well, that's a great question, and I don't have the answers. What I tend to tell people is right now is a time to reach out to communities. So a lot more community engaged work is a good, given the lack of public trust, right? So whatever that looks like. Does it mean going to your kid's school and talking about what it is you do? Yes. Give a talk at your local public library. Yes. Senior citizens, go to the old folks home and talk to them about what you do. Start a blog, start a podcast, start a whatever. You don't need to reach millions of people to be successful, right? If you can just convince 2 people that higher ed is actually better than they thought, you've won, right? I mean, that's the key thing right now in terms of public trust is we've been saying this for years. We need to get out of the ivory tower and we need to do more outreach. That's true. But we've been doing that now for a few decades because we recognize that as a huge problem, I think in the 80s. And we've been talking about it ever since. I think the ways that we do it aren't necessarily helping. I think the pathways, we think about doing lectures to the public, but we tend to lecture to the choirs, right? So we're not reaching people who don't already care about us. So it's more about how do you reach people who are interested or curious? They love the History Channel. Okay, so how do we reach them to help them understand that without us, without the intellectual and the scholarly work that's done in institutions of higher education, there is no History Channel, right? There's nothing new, there's nothing to build. And so how do you help them understand that pipeline? There's a question in the chat before I keep going. Do you help students from any department with writing the grant? I generally don't help students directly. And the ACLS, we don't have many programs for grad students, as I mentioned. Those that we do, I'm not sure if we help students. And I haven't worked with math and statistics, that's for sure. When I worked in the sciences, it was mostly earth sciences, social sciences, biological sciences. A little bit of space. It was a weird one for me. Didn't know much about it. Anyway, so period of transition, reach out to communities as much as we can. Again, that's about changing public opinion and hearts and minds, etc. Internally, we need to be bolstering our research cultures on campus, right? So you're lucky at USF. Those of you who are at USF, you have a strong research office that cares, and they do things like this where they try to educate faculty and staff and students and others about the research landscape and whatever. Most universities and colleges don't have a strong research, or if they do, it's like med school, right? Maybe med and engineering, but certainly not humanities and social sciences, and definitely not art, right? So it's important to have these sort of people on campus, but this is a good time to build those connections. I'm always amazed. I go to, go to a number of schools of all kinds, small colleges, big universities. I go to some of the top R1 institutions in the country, and I'm amazed that the faculty don't know anybody in the Office of Sponsored Programs. And I think to myself, how is that possible? They're like, if you're interested in grants, if you're interested in getting grants, whether it's for promotion, whether it's for your research, whatever it is, if you don't know anyone in the Office of Sponsored Programs, you are doing it wrong. I don't know what it's called at USF, but the equivalent, the grants office, the research office, the administrators and the staff whose entire job is to help you get grants. If you don't know who they are, or you don't know where they are, or you're not aware of what they offer, you as a faculty member, scholar, staff, you're doing something wrong. Now, not to say anything, some research offices don't provide services for certain people, right? Like I said, there are places where they just don't have the bandwidth and they can't help the humanities. That's a different problem. But if you have a research office on campus, it behooves you to go and introduce yourself, to go find out what they have on offer, what's available to you. And let's say you go to the research office, and like many research offices, they have a limited staff. They have a lot of people with need, especially right now, and they're just completely overwhelmed. What can you do to help them? Like, don't go to them and say, I need this from you. Go to them, introduce yourself, talk about what you do, talk about what you're interested in. And if you get the sense that they're overwhelmed, the first question you should ask is there something I could be doing that could be helpful? For example, I understand that, you don't have the bandwidth to deal with all the humanities fellowships that we want to send out this year. Maybe I could start a working group with other faculty who are interested, and we could look at each other's proposals and sort of help each other out. That's a common thing that people are doing on campuses now, sort of application writing groups of particularly faculty. Young career, early career faculty in particular tend to not have a lot of experience in grant writing. So mixing senior faculty with junior faculty is often a really good model that can be done. And these can be done without the direct intervention of the Office of Sponsored Programs or the Office of Research or whatever it's called there at your campus. So, what I like to tell people is, and it can be hard as an academic, you're very focused on yourself and your research and your students, right? And it's very hard to think in a corporate mindset about how can we collectively help each other out, right? You almost feel in competition with each other. And I can assure you, you're really not, right? So if you all apply to the ACLS fellowship, given the statistics, you're all likely to be rejected, right? So you're really, I know that's very dismal, but you're not really in competition with each other. And it behooves you to learn to work with each other to improve your grant writing, improve your application writing, and think about, how you can help each other in productive ways. The other thing I'd say to administrators is to provide opportunities, right? So even if the staffing is an issue, um, small seed grants, $5,000, $3,000, and for research, I don't mean like to go to conferences. That's usually a different thing. But money to get to an archive to actually start the work, or to, if you're doing community-based work or ethnographic research or something like that, sociological research, money to get to the communities that you need to meet to start building trust. You can't apply for a big grant until you've done some of that preliminary work. And if you don't have any money to get there, you can't get started. So what I often say to administrators is, even if you can't afford more staff, more whatever, small grants go a long way, particularly in the humanities and social sciences, right? They go a long way to get people launched. And I really encourage that from administrators to think about how can you stretch your budget just a little bit to provide opportunities. Another thing that at the NEH we used to promote was the idea of doing internal peer review on campus. So if, let's say, the dean's office says, okay, well, we have $10,000, we're going to give 4 awards of $2,500 for seed grants for research in the humanities and social sciences, for example. The dean's office could run a peer review on campus where they ask 3 faculty members or 4 faculty members to read the applications and do the review just like it was the NEH, NSF, NIH, whatever, run a panel, and they determine the outcome. The benefit of that, rather than just the dean picking, right? The process of peer review is incredibly helpful for everyone involved. The people who are doing the peer review learn a lot about good and bad application writing, right? And then the people who are applying hopefully are going to get comments back. So even if they don't get the award, they can get feedback. That whole process is really beneficial, and it promotes this culture of research on campus, which I always say is really, really important, right? Getting into the mindset that research and peer review is a critical part of what we do on campus, even if you're at a teaching intensive institution, right? Research improves teaching. It improves student outcomes. They've proven that in numerous studies. Particularly, yes, when students are involved in research, it's even better. But actually, even when students aren't involved in research, but the faculty are inspired because they're doing their own original research and they can talk about it to their students, that inspires the students more. So there's more interest, there's more output, there's more outcomes. So research is fundamental to teaching and mentorship, but also just to, improve faculty happiness. I don't know what you call that. Not just their own edification, but their advancement. Obviously, research makes a university or a college look really good, right? They get an article out, and that's great for the university. It's great for the college. So that culture of research is what I'm getting at. Is what we should all be thinking about, is how do we foster that on campus, and then how do we communicate that off campus? So those are my 2 big kind of takeaways. And I think that's everything that I thought of. I think Russ joined us. So if you have other thoughts on what I should talk about, I welcome them. But if any of you have questions, as I said, please feel free to put them in the chat or speak up.
Hi, Chris. I did join you.
Hi, Russ.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm fine.
I did join you late, though. Did you talk at all about the ACLS's new partnership with Luce, or is there just nothing to say at this point? But it seemed to dovetail nicely with what you were saying about public engagement.
Right.
So is there anything more that you can say about that?
Yeah, no, thank you for the prompt. Yes, so we were just recently announced we were awarded a grant from the Luce Foundation to pilot a new civics education grant program. And, there's a zillion civics education grant programs out there. So we're going to try to avoid calling it that. And we're still building it. So in one sense, I can't give you all specifics because we're still working on that. We're hoping to launch it, I think, in January. So, stay tuned. But the idea of it was that the Luce Foundation is, if you don't know them, they fund mostly the arts and humanities. with a focus on East Asia and American art for the most part. They fund our China Studies program, for example. They also fund religious studies and indigenous studies and indigenous art. And they have a new part of the Luce Foundation, which is focused on democracy and civics. And it is that part, that branch, or whatever you want to call it, of that division of Luce that approached us. Like I said, we have a relationship with a lot of these foundations where they don't want to run grant programs themselves. So they come to us and they say, would you be willing to run a grant program for us? And they came to us and asked if we would run a pilot grant program that would be, and again, I don't have the specifics, but the gist of it is trying to identify existing programs in which university faculty and or students are engaged with non-university or college, I should say, non-higher ed communities on issues of civics and democracy. So an example might be a class on democracy and civics in which the students and the faculty member work with a community on, let's say a senior community or an immigrant community on talking about the American Constitution or talking about voting rights and, with a Black community in the South, for example. And it, something like that where it's working with non-students or people not involved traditionally in the university, so more community engaged. And the program is meant to identify sort of the best programs of this type, with the idea that what they'd apply for is either to scale what they're already doing. Let's say that you have an existing program that's been running for 5 to 10 years, it's very successful, and you've been working with an Ethiopian immigrant community for years. And now you want to broaden it and you want to go work with a Senegalese community that has recently arrived and you'd like to start the same program. That would be an example of scaling the program, moving it into a new location or a new community, and you need funding in order to make that happen. Or you have a program, again, let's take the example of you've been working with an Ethiopian immigrant community on issues of voting rights, civics, representation and democracy. But it's been very top down. It's, you came from the university to their community leaders or community center and said, we'd like to work with you. And it's very top down. So the power dynamic is like from the university down onto them. And you want to figure out a way to make it more co-led and co-created. So that could be workshops. It could be all kinds of activities to try to allow that immigrant community, in this example, to take more power back and to dictate more what they need or what they want from the university rather than what the university thinks they want. So that is the gist of what I know of the program right now, is that existing programs can apply to either transform their program to be more co-led or co-created with the community, or to scale the work that they're already doing into a new location or to a new community. That's what we've talked about with Luce. Again, the specifics are a little vague, but we did just announce it, so that's the best I can give you. And if you have questions about that, I'm happy to answer them as best as I can. NEH seems to be pulling away from some areas of the humanities. What should those in Asian studies be doing right now? Well, not applying to the NEH right now. That's the obvious answer. If you don't fall into the NEH categories, and the NSF is going through this similarly, right? The Social Behavioral Economic, SBE. That's the social science wing of NSF, is also struggling right now. Officially they're being told to dissolve and disappear and whatever. Right now, if you don't fit into the sort of restricted categories of what the NEH does, obviously what you need to do is be looking elsewhere for opportunities. And there are existing foundations. It's a little trickier because you have to dig around a lot more. You have to, often they're family foundations. They're often very regional too. So when you're looking for funding, what I often say is look at who the big names are in your field. Where are they getting funding from? Right? Who has endowed their professorship? Who has endowed the center that they're the director of? Who sponsored, go look at the acknowledgement section of their book or their articles. Who funded their research? And what you often find are these random family foundations. And then you can start trying to figure out how to get a hold of them. right? And this is hard work, right? And this is the reality of today with the NEH restricting and the NSF restricting what they'll support. For those of you who fall outside of that, and I too would fall out of that if I were still doing my research, you're going to have to look a little deeper into the foundations. And again, offices of sponsored programs, research offices can be helpful in that regard. I know that for those in the Humanities Center, I think at Kansas or Kansas State, Kansas, something like that, keeps a really good running website list of grant opportunities in the humanities, particularly fellowships. So that's a nice place to look. And otherwise, if you work in parts of the world, there's often regional programs. For those who used to rely on the State Department programs or the Ed Department, so like Fulbright, Title VI, it's very unclear what's happening to them right now. I'm sure many of you know this. They announced that they were canceling them. They announced that they were restricting them, and then quietly they started giving the money out. And so they are giving out money, but it's not clear to whom and how, and it's all a little vague. So a number of centers that were like, "Oh, gee, we're not going to get funding now because no way," and suddenly State Department or Ed, somebody at Department of Ed calls them up and said, "Hey, so do you still want that money?" Yeah, thanks, Russ, the University of Kansas. Somebody from Ed calls them up and say, "Hey, do you still need that, $3 million or whatever?" And yes, obviously. So again, I don't have answers, but I just know that what's happening in the news isn't necessarily what's happening in reality. When they're like, "We've canceled Title VI or we canceled Fulbright," and then suddenly there's money and they're giving it away. So I don't have any answers on that one. But for those of you working in area studies, it's a complicated time because it's not clear if there is or is not federal funding. And that is often like the foundations don't want to suddenly try to like make up for funding, because if they do that, then that gives the federal government the excuse to say, "Great, then we don't have to fund it because the foundations are stepping in," right? So there's like this weird liminal zone that we're all living in right now. Any other questions? Again, I'm happy to answer questions as needed. It's 4:00. So it might be happy hour time. I don't know. Oh, I hear it's hot down there, so maybe stay indoors.
Do you have early happy hour in DC? Is that what you're saying, Chris?
I mean, I personally, yes, but you think this is coffee, but it's actually no. No, but it's Friday, man. Come on, like we gotta live a little. These are tough times.
These are tough times, especially for the humanities.
True. It's very true.
But the humanities and the arts, they've never been well funded. So it is an effort to secure funding for early career faculty, for faculty that have been doing it for a long time, faculty taking their research in a new direction. So for faculty at all levels, are there opportunities for mentoring and support faculty success through these organizations that you know of?
It's a great question. I think some of the residential centers, the humanity centers on various campuses, obviously because those are more cohort based, there's more of a feeling of sort of connections. They wouldn't necessarily call it mentorship, particularly for a senior faculty member, but building connections and sort of trying to help scholars to be mutually beneficial in helping each other, etc. Cross-fertilization, whatever you want to call it. I think there's definitely a movement for mentoring junior faculty and grad students, right? I mean, that's obvious. And many of these residential centers do that very intentionally, where they bring in, let's say, one or two senior faculty to be senior fellows, and then they have a bunch of early career who are, more like junior fellows, and then they might even have some grad students around. And that's a nice model too, because you get the breadth. ACLS has some programs, particularly for grad students and early career. Like I mentioned, these vocational fellowships often have a mentoring component built in where they have to, and including for our dissertation fellowships, you have to identify not only your advisor who writes a letter for you when you apply, but you have to identify a mentor who's not your advisor. it doesn't even have to be at your campus, but somebody has agreed that they will mentor you in this sort of innovative way that you're doing dissertation. And so there's that built in with our grad programs. We at ACLS do a lot of cohort building ourselves, although recently we've been doing less of that, but we used to do a lot more of that. I would say, for example, in our smaller programs, like our HBCU program for historically Black colleges and universities, we do some cohort building. We do some sort of training of administrators on campuses about what they can do to help with writing applications for fellowships, etc. We do draft reading, but we also, with rejected applicants in that program, we convene them virtually to talk amongst themselves and with us about the comments they got back and why they were rejected, and how they might improve and how they might, to sort of help them through. Because often you can imagine in many HBCUs, they're essentially community colleges or very small colleges, and they don't have a culture of research on campus, and they don't have someone like you, Sandy, to come to and ask questions of. So we try to give them that sort of leg up. But that's rare. ACLS is pretty high touch in that sense, because we work so much with higher ed.
And that's one of the reasons why ACLS is held in such high regard.
I hope so. We try.
So, Chris, you have a captured audience. Are there any burning questions that you have for us? What is it that you'd like to see from early career scholars?
Interesting question. When you first started asking that question, I was like, am I allowed to ask questions about what it's like to be faculty in Florida, or is this just not a cone of silence? Okay, let's not do that. Let's not get in trouble today. Early career, I would say, one of the things that I see a lot from early career scholars, whether they're grad students or early career faculty, and I'm sure Russ would say exactly the same thing, is there's that impulse to be iconoclastic in the way that that the work you're doing and the research you're doing is going to change the world. And either there's the straw man arguments, that they take some straw man to beat up in the application, and they're like, how stupid was Foucault? And what I'm doing is totally different. Okay. You think you could beat up Michel Foucault? Good luck. But anyway, but this kind of straw man argument is a very typical kind of early application writing sort of thing. And it's very noticeable to those of us who read thousands of applications. Like, we spot it instantly. And it's not great. I mean, peer reviewers often see it, and they'll often say, well, it's kind of a straw man argument, but okay, we'll let them go because they're early career. But it's not a strong argument to make, right? To just pick someone and beat them up is just not a good look, right? The iconoclastic thing is also problematic, right? This idea that what I'm doing, nobody has ever done before, and I'm just going to break the world with this amazing new research. And that comes from it comes from a sort of youthful insecurity, right? It comes from that youthful ignorance as well, of that passion that we all felt in grad school, and that, you're really excited about your work. But it also comes from people telling you really need to sell it. You really need to sell what is the broad significance of your work. And we think that when we're young, especially, we translate that to mean, how am I the next Albert Einstein? Or how am I the next Michel Foucault? Like, how am I going to break the world? And when you're young, especially, early career, grad student, etc., it looks naive. It looks naive to peer reviewers. It looks naive to grantors, because you sort of chuckle at it. You're just like, okay, good luck. I hope that works out for you. But that naivete doesn't translate well. It suggests that they're not quite ready yet. So what I often like to say to early career when they're applying is, broad significance doesn't mean you're tearing the world apart. Broad significance means that you're engaging with an existing discourse. And so what I always tell, or I try to tell early career applicants is, how are you contributing to an ongoing discourse where you're adding a new and exciting voice, but in a constructive, complementary way, not in a everybody else shut up because I'm here now kind of way. And when you explain it like that, it seems obvious, right? If you come into a room with people talking, you shouldn't swan in and say, okay, everyone shut up, I'm here now. And they're like, who the heck are you, right? You walk into a room and you sort of sidle up to people talking and you listen and you're like, oh, hi, everyone. I was just here to listen. And, oh, I can actually comment on that because I did this. And then people go, oh, how interesting, right? That's the way you should approach an early career application, right? I mean, if you're a big name full professor and you've written multiple books, you kind of made it. So you can come in and be a little bit like, I've written a bunch of books, kind of important. And I'm going to add another one. So here's what I'd like to do. Right? And peer reviewers will accept that because you are already full professor. But when you're junior, you need to sidle up a little bit. You need to show that I've heard each of you speaking already. I've been listening and like I really love this discourse. Here's what I've got. Here's where I'm coming from. And here's what I want to bring to this conversation. Maybe I can even change the direction of the conversation. Have you all thought about this instead of that? That kind of mentality in early career application goes so much further. It just looks really nuanced. It looks like you understand the discourse, and that your broad significance is that you're going to contribute to this in new ways, right? From your positionality, your perspective, but also with your background and the research that you're doing. And that is the best case application, I always say. Right. And it's a really hard line to walk, as a Sandy, I'm sure you know, right? Like, it's like, how do you argue for broad significance and stand up above the crowd without turning into the person banging this, the symbols together to say, look at me, look at me. And it's really hard. But you can get there. And that's where, application writing workshops, talking with your peers, being a peer reviewer is the best way to learn how to write an application, because you have to read like 30, 40, 50 applications. And by the end of it, you're like, man, I could write this in my sleep, right? So that's a great way to do it as well. But it is hard to find that footing, Rebecca. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really hard, and it's hard to find that right balance between being like, I'm here and I'm exciting and I'm new, and I want to help and I want to contribute and I want to be part of the discourse. But that's really the sort of number one thing, because too often we see early career and grad students coming at you just like, I'm going to burn the world down. And you just say, okay, calm down. The other thing for grad students and recent PhDs is dissertationese, which is a very specific language that we all know. The jargon laden and I would say performative. That's my favorite word. Performative writing, performative application writing, where you're performing or you're showing that you know all the big words. But dissertationese is awful for application writing. It's the death. No peer reviewer wants to read dissertationese. So you have to write that for your dissertation, because a dissertation is a performative act, right? And it is meant to be that you're performing. It's like the recital at the end of your year of learning the piano. You're doing your recital. So here is my dissertation. And I've learned to do research, and I've learned to write a book, and I've learned to do this. That's fine. And you have to show the right jargon and the right language, because you're writing it for 3 people, right? But once you get into application writing, you've then got to translate that into a broader scholarly discourse and to people who don't know your exact dissertation and don't know your field. So you need to change the jargon a little bit. Does ACLS take early career scholars as reviewers? Yes, we do. Traditionally, we've focused more on senior scholars, but there's a new sheriff in town. And I believe that early career scholars need that opportunity as well. So we've been bringing them in. I would say last year we brought in more than we had in previous years, and we're going to keep doing that, trying to give them a chance. Sounds like humility, Jordan. Yeah, well, it's true. Humility is hard sometimes, right? And again, it's not because people have massive egos, although occasionally that is true. It's more because we teach people, you got to push for what's your significance? How do you stand out? What's going to make you? And so you're encouraged to think in those terms. And it can often translate badly in an application, right? So yeah, it's partly about humility, but it's also more about how do you sing your own. Think about a job. When you apply for a job, it's the same problem. How do you sing your praises without looking like a jerk, right? Like, how does the cover letter, like, what is the balance there? And that's a really hard balance, and it differs. Just like applying for different jobs, you have to change your cover letter. Applying to different fellowships or grant programs, you have to change your application to match the tone and what they're interested in. And again, it's something you learn over time as a grant writer or an application writer. You're not a grant writer. I'm a grant writer. You're an application writer. Something you learn over time is that balance, but it takes time. And this is, again, where matching senior faculty with more junior faculty, especially if they're not in the same department, and just teaching them, to write grants can be a really great way on campus, especially in times like this when funding is really hard to get. Your time might be better spent just working on your internal research culture rather than fixating on just sending things off into the dark, hoping for a lottery win, right? It's a tough time right now. So it's my it's my pep talk.
Bradley, did you have a question? I see that you turned your camera on, so that always indicates to me that you're ready to speak. No, I do not. Well, that's a shame. I thought for sure you were going to join the conversation.
I think he's had his camera on the whole time. Appreciate that, Bradley.
Well, I appreciate all of this conversation. Chris, you really are so approachable, easy to understand, and what you're sharing with us is truly relevant. And these are the things that we want to see in all of our proposals. And the clarity of your message, it just could not ring more true. Thank you so much for being here today. You're amazing.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I appreciate it. And maybe someday I'll come down to St. Pete's. Hey, Russ.
Yes.
Did you raise your hand or were you just saying hi?
Oh, I was trying. Yes, I did raise my hand, but then I quickly dropped my hand because I realized I didn't want the raise hand button. I wanted the react button, and I was going to applaud. But anyway.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that. Well, thank you all for inviting me. If you ever have questions for ACLS or about ACLS, I should say, feel free to reach out. I'll put my email in the chat in case it's helpful. And Russ knows how to find me at all times, so he can also do it that way. But again, good luck out there. I know it's tough right now, but let's keep the hope alive and focus on how we can develop our own skills at a difficult time like this and help each other. It's a critical time for us not to be solo, so we're here for you, and good luck.
And we look forward to hearing more about the Luce Award.
Yes.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll launch that hopefully soon.
Bravo, and thank you. And this is recorded, so if anyone needs it, they can watch it again.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great weekend.
Thank you, Chris.